I'm not really sure what the level of everyone's knowledge here is about the Kurdish issue, whether it is recent, beginning with Rojava, or there's much more depth as into the Kurdish question, how it's risen, and how it's come to the stage that we are evaluating it now. So I will say a few words about the history, just to give you a bit of a background on it. Kurdistan was partitioned into 4 different states: Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, as a result of the formation of nation states that began in Europe and then was exported all around the world, including the Middle East. It was initially actually partitioned between 2 empires, the Iran and the Ottoman Empire, and then later, as the formation of nation states developed, it was then partitioned further into 4, and they have been left at the mercy of these states. So after World War I and the continuation of World War I, maybe we can see as World War II, the status quo of the nation states has largely been kept. Therefore, no new states as such have been formed, apart from a few exceptions. So all other nations have been denied states, and Kurds are one of them. So it was nothing special to the Kurds. Their speciality was that, like the Sami people in Scandinavia perhaps, that they were partitioned they were not colonized by one nation, but in fact more than 4 nations. And in fact, the Kurdish issue and the partitioning was not exactly as a result of war between Kurds and Arabs, Kurds and Persian, Kurds and Turks, and all the rest. Instead, it was actually due to the international agreements that the Kurdish homeland was partitioned in such a way. So therefore, it was even more difficult for the Kurds, because the denial then became international. Denial then were supported by the superpowers. Therefore, any effort on the Kurdish part to fight this colonization was also deemed or was criminalized by the superpowers and the system that was in place around the world. So therefore, any Kurdish party or any Kurdish movement at the beginning was automatically blacklisted. So it didn't matter what kind of an ideology any of these Kurdish parties have, just because they would fight, struggle for the freedom or the acknowledgement, recognition of Kurdish identity and individual and collective rights would be deemed terrorist or against the state or whatever, and would be thus treated as such. But of course, if you had a background of Marxist-Leninism, that you proclaimed yourself to be a Marxist-Leninist organization, especially in the Middle East, especially at those times, then you would have been targeted much more. And perhaps now we will come to the differences between the ideologies or the distinct tendencies between the different Kurdish parties. As it is today, there are 2 distinct tendencies. One is a status tendency, which is at the peak, at the highest level, is represented by the Kurdish regional government and the KDP, and also the non-statist approach, which is represented by the PKK. So the Kurdish freedom movement, the PKK, actually opposed the status quo all around. So when it was first founded, it did not just start for the north of Kurdistan, which is occupied by Turkey, but it also claimed that Kurdistan was an international colony, and that this colonization was both agreed upon in the region and around the world. So it had in mind all of the parts of Kurdistan, even from the beginning. So there were other attributes of the PKK which actually opposed the status quo. One of them was its approach to women. Even during its founding members are, as such, coming from different walks of life, different ethnicities. There are 2 women as the founding members of the PKK, etc. So as time went on, of course this did not happen overnight, but over the 40 years throughout its PKK struggle, PKK went through several transformations. It did not approach its outlook on the Kurdish question or about the internal dynamics, the feudality of its own society, etc., very dogmatically. Instead, it also evaluated and analyzed the questions that were arising throughout the struggle and reached several points which in turn again became a very strong opposition to the status quo, and that was one of them is approach to revolutionary violence. Second is women's freedom. The third is its approach to state. And also throughout, of course, all these 40 years, it fought against colonialism, but that wasn't the only thing. It also looked for alternatives to capitalism. So in fact, it gave an intertwined struggle. So even at the beginning, it wasn't really solely a national liberation movement. It didn't just want to resolve the identity question of the Kurdish people, but from the very early on days, it had independence and freedom as its main slogan, and also it included other peoples and beliefs with its approach to these sections of the society too. So you will find that we have some books here by Ocalan. One of them is one that Ocalan gives a background to the Kurdish question, what I have briefly been describing to you, and he's going much more in detail into the history of the PKK, and self-criticism on the points that we're talking about. As I said, to women's freedom, because I will come to the reasons for that, but yeah, self-criticism on behalf of the PKK he is giving, and discussions on a solution is being developed in this book and furthered later on. So let's look at some of the issues that have been actually the stumbling blocks for all the revolutions around the world. Because we had the revolution in Soviet Union with the Bolsheviks and all that, and we had 1968 revolution throughout the world, but what we are seeing is that somehow we're not at the point where we can actually propose an alternative life or alternative system to capitalism, and capitalism is trying to also put it into our minds and heads that there is no other way. This is the only way, so you better make the best of it and live with it. So one of the really important points is approach to women's revolution and its enslavement. In fact, Ocalan is not really taking the women's enslavement issue with capitalism alone. So he's taking it back to 5,000 years ago, to the beginning of patriarchy, and he's trying to establish also a history of women. So if you look at that purple brochure that you see here, he looks at history and human history according to that. So he sees Neolithics as the first revolution of the humans in general, and then first counter-revolution for the beginning of patriarchy to be that. So the PKK too has adopted this lane that all other enslavements are actually built upon this woman's enslavement. So the society has been actually split in the first instance upon two, with the woman's freedom being taken away slowly through ideological and other tools. In fact, the PKK describes women to be first class, first nation, and first colony. So it's very central in the struggle against patriarchy and in the ideology of PKK, and thus, therefore, what's happening in Rojava. So I'm not saying much of Rojava at the moment, because suddenly, bang, we have this Rojava as if it came from, out of this world, out of the galaxy or something, and it's not like that. You know, there's a huge 40 years of struggle, doing wrong, doing right, you know, and trying to learn not only from their own experience, but experiences from around the world. So something that could be a lesson for all enslavements is the way that this enslavement was built. It was first built ideologically. I mean, let's have a look at it, you know, in religions and also in mythology, before religions as well. We are seeing how women's situation and prominence is slowly reduced, even in mythological narratives as well as, of course, in religion. You know, slowly there is the story of Adam and Eve, and, you know, Adam is created and then Eve is created from something else, and so slowly we have an ideological construction before us that is trying to instill within us that woman is less than men, or it is a supplement of men. So slowly we get the implantation of women being a weaker sex, and that's why this is all okay. But of course, it wasn't just an ideological construction. David in his, hi David. David in his book Debt, I think, goes very much into this as well, that lots of violence was used against women. I mean, the one that we remember maybe quite well is the burning of witches in Europe by its millions. So we're not talking about a small scale of violence, but a violence coupled with ideology, coupled with certain different powers, including economical, military, and etc., to break down the system that was created by women, and that's why she was the target. Not because she's a woman, but she is the creator of a system. And in order to get rid of that system, you have to somehow get rid of the creators of that system. And finally, of course, the best way to enslave is to seize the economy. So you're dependent in all ways, you know. You abide by it then totally, because ideologically you're aligned, and if you're step out of it, violence comes into play at any time at all. And of course, economically in our world, you know, money is freedom. You really can't do anything if you don't have it. But of course, the PKK is not just talking about women's enslavement and freedom. One of the fundamental principles in this, Ocalan says, and you will find it in that brochure again, to kill the dominant men is a fundamental principle. So we cannot see this exploitation thing just out of us, you know, because this is all instilled in every and each one of us, so that this system can be reproduced and regenerated at all times. And family is a very good unit for this. Universities are, schools are, television, the cultural and the arts sector, the sports sector, all of it actually combined together help to reproduce the roles and the role plays for us. So the whole idea here, because no matter how deep it was dug, the class struggle did not answer the question, because we saw that in different revolutions and their aftermath, that when the proletariat had the power, they just did the same. They were no longer proletariat either. You know, so we saw that this wasn't the end of line. And Ocalan in his book says, I do not doubt the good intentions of all those revolutionaries who wanted a different life. But if we are using the same tools of this system, not just capitalism, but of patriarchy in general, then is it possible that we produce something else? You know, I mean, can we say that, oh, we are Kurdish and we suffered so much, and so our nation state will be great? Well, if we think that, let's have a look at Israel, I would say. Because victims can very quickly turn into perpetrators. Because it's not about being a victim. It's about the ideological principles and exploitation, ways of exploitation that are instilled in us, that that make us turn from a victim into a perpetrator. So when we say women, we shouldn't really think that the goodness in women will just conquer everything else. It doesn't work like that either, because we've had our share for the past 5,000 years as well. So this means a huge struggle in each and every person, but that's not also enough. It means changing of mechanisms. It means changing of the centralization of power, dismantling that. So it's not enough to just dismantle accumulation of power. It's also very important, and Ocalan, I think, puts this very well, accumulation of power itself over the 5,000 years. So, as well as negative hierarchy. So there can be positive hierarchy, but negative hierarchy is another fundamental principle that is worked on to be dismantled. The next issue is, of course, nation-state issue. So, the PKK and Ocalan believe that one of the stumbling blocks is women's revolution, or the women's enslavement, the way you approach it. So he's actually, unlike, this is where he's differing from Marxism and Leninism. I mean, he's very dialectical, and it's a very great base that he has taken from Marxism and Leninism, but he is differing from it by founding the new paradigm, not on class, but on women's enslavement. Because he believes all the rest are photocopies of this, and bad imitations of this. So it's not only actually women that's enslaved, thereby you have nature, men is enslaved as well, because it is being given the woman to exploit so that he can be exploited as well and better, maybe. Nation state, as I said, state in general is being criticized by the PKK. So unlike, some people are trying to claim, the PKK and Ocalan did not come to these understandings that I'm talking about here by coincidence. The complexity of the Kurdish question and all avenues being tried, you could not come to a solution of freedom and independence. Because even if you look at just from the point of view of having a nation state, we're seeing that none of the nation states are independent anyway. I mean, look at the Kurdish regional government. I'd like to give that as an example so it's understood. If there's no support by Turkey, Israel, and USA, it will not be able to stand on its 4 feet, or 2 feet, sorry. And so there will be, for example, this is what happened when ISIS came all the way to Erbil, because it waited for others to do something for itself. And when they didn't, they said, we don't have enough weapons, we don't have this, we don't have that. And ISIS was able to sweep through the whole of the Kurdish region. And the PKK guerrillas came in only with their Kalashnikovs and were able to stop them. So why am I saying this? Have the Peshmergas less courage? No. But it is an ideological issue. It's the dependence issue that is coming into play here as well. So, although of course I don't want to paint a picture that before nation states the world was a lovely place, no, it wasn't. There were wars again, there were power plays and conquering and etc. But the biggest debris was that you based the state on a single nation. And this was most barbarically done everywhere else, but also in the Middle East, I mean, here in Europe too, you don't have a region where it's only one ethnicity. You also have several ethnicities living in the same area as well. I mean, there are plenty of examples for that. Italy is one, Germany is another. Perhaps here, I mean, British Empire, we know. Yeah, exactly. That's maybe another subject to be discussed because it is also at the foundation, actually, of these nation states and also the growth and development of capitalism. It's one of the leaders, together with Netherlands. So it really began to divide humanity on a much larger scale, and it really turned our world into a graveyard of peoples of different nationalities. So it's of course it became a terrible tool of repression as well. And of course, with these nation states and capitalism, there was much more profound exploitation. I mean, this is why the violence on women became even more disguised, and also the indigenous peoples' violence against them and their exploitation also became quite terrible, because capitalism needs unpaid labor to be able to continue itself. So with the workers, you can get into, through unions and all that, get into some kind of a collaboration, and you struggle, you get some rights or whatever. But with indigenous people, with women, there's work being done either unpaid or at a very low pay, and this is how capitalism is able to actually turn it around for itself. Otherwise, if it's all with the workers, you pay them anyway, and I'm making a bit of a generalization here. Now, approach to violence is also a third and very important stumbling block for all of the revolutions, because we saw that in the Soviet Union, there became an immense competition towards arming, militarization, and etc. So therefore, PKK came to the conclusion that instead of revolutionary violence, it began to use the term self-defense, legitimate self-defense. So it decided that it must not be left to the mercy of men alone, because this has become a traditional area of, a profession, job, or traditionally it's men's area, so it shouldn't be just left to the mercy of that. It should not be professionalized, and they should be made accountable to bottom-up structures, so to the localities as much as possible. And of course, it saw that violence was monopolized by the states. So therefore, this is why, of course, PKK and all other Kurdish organizations at the beginning were criminalized as well, because only states can make use of violence. Anyone else, in their defense, doing anything else, then are against the state, because then you are working against the system that has been established. So with women's unique self-defense units, this is also important, because best way to describe it would be in what happened in Mount Sinjar area, as well as in Rojava. Especially with the area of Yazidi Kurds, we saw that ordinary men and women, in order to save their own lives, just ran away, and all those who couldn't save themselves actually were either abducted by ISIS or killed, or their families killed the women, so that they wouldn't fall into the hands of ISIS, because they saw that not all can be saved. So therefore, instead of women now leaving themselves in the hands of others to be protected, according to all the ideological and the organizational tools women had, finally, this happened, of course, before the Shengal and also Rojava situations, women had been establishing their own defense units to be able to protect themselves, so they are not left at their mercy. And this we saw became quite valuable later on, and even to date today. So therefore, women do not have to thrust their well-being or security or life in the hands of others. Now, of course, talking about all this, we are slowly moving into the ideology or the paradigm that Ocalan and the PKK is putting forth. Ocalan is saying modernity is not just capitalism's, because all these things that are useful and good are not just a product of capitalism. I mean, ordinary people, invented things and put their labor into it, and what capitalism is doing, just usurping these, and using it to make money instead of for the good of everybody. So therefore, modernity is too good to be left in their hand. So he's coining the word, or the terminology, democratic modernity, which means the lives and struggles of throughout the these 400 or so years of the ordinary people as well. So if capitalism has three pillars, which is capitalist modernity has three pillars, which is capitalism, industrialism, and nation state, then democratic modernity has to frame itself as democratic nation. We have to have an answer in how, as a social system, how we're going to do this. Ecologic industry, so we're not saying industry no way, but industrialism is what is bad. So social economy based on use value, and it's still being discussed. I mean, the bare fundamentals is there, but how to do it in practice is still being discussed. So for this, there are three main projects. Democratic Republic, this is the transformation that is envisaged for the states that occupy Kurdistan, so for Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Democratic Republic is a project for these states because democratic confederalism does not foresee its own borders. So secondly, democratic autonomy. This means local self-governance and how this democratic autonomy will have what kind of a relationship it will have with these democratic republics. Thirdly, democratic confederalism, which is described to be the social system of democratic modernity, which is democratic, ecological, and gender-liberated society. I said a while ago that everybody has their own analysis of history. If we look at capitalism, it's on the basis of formation and fall of nation states and power and this and that. Marxism has it on class. So Ocalan, through doing it on women, is really basing his own paradigm on moral and political society. So he's looking at the development and what's happening to the society throughout these 5,000 years and actually doing their manifesto. And actually the book I've just translated and is coming out in April is going to be the first book of the 5 books of Manifesto of Democratic Civilization. So therefore, this is what he's looking at large. Therefore, he's going and analyzing law, morality, scienticism, religionism, secularism, all these issues. And so he's trying to map out this development and deduce from this an alternative way of life and a system. So when I actually read, and you won't be able to read this for a while yet, his third book, which is the Sociology of Freedom, this is where he maps out his own understanding of an alternative life. I thought, I was just really in suspense. I was thinking, I wonder what he's going to come up with. And it's really here in our lives. Really no need to go and look further away from it. It's really here in our lives. We just need to bring it all together and make it work. But to be able to do this, of course, he's gone at a great length and depth to be able to expose how the colonization, and I'm not just talking about indigenous people like the Kurds and how they've been colonized, but in general, how humanity, their mind has been colonized and they have been made destitute to the system and to think that no other ways and means is possible. And the more, of course, we live in these urban cities, and the more we get detached from land, from animals, from the nature in general, the more we feel that we can't do without the city, or we can't do without the state, or that it is impossible for us to live any other way. So he's exposing all this and replacing it. So Öcalan foresaw this. He saw the coup coming, the military coup. So what he did was he warned all the militants and he said, we've got to get out of the country because this is not just directed at the Turkish left, and because the movement was picking up a lot of attention from the Kurdish people, so there was a lot of interest in it, especially in certain areas, cities that was close to Turkey, border with Turkey. So anyway, he and some of his friends went to Rojava. And the very first town actually they passed to is Kobane. As you've heard a lot about Kobane, it is the border town to the Kurdish part in Turkey, Kurdistan in Turkey. So this was the very, very first city he went and he first organized. So it's really no wonder that this little town, which, you know, the hill they talk about is not even a hill, you know. It's not a mountain or anything. It's just a, you know, we say in Kurdish kopuk, it's not even a hilltop. So, so this is, there are reasons for its resistance. And the resistance is for an alternative way of life, not just only for the Kurdish identity to live through. Am I? Okay, I mean, you know how it is when the moderators move, you think, okay, I've done this too much. Okay, so in fact, of course, you know, I talked about two different ideological tendencies within the Kurdish parties that struggle in Kurdistan for Kurdish rights. As I said, one is the statist approach, which is really now opted by the superpowers. I mean, the superpowers actually do support the Kurdistan regional government. They are behind it. And they have a tendency to reflect this as the Kurdistan. And they have a tendency to reflect the flag as the flag. And what Öcalan is doing is saying, this is what's been done to date. Everyone has been made to fight under these flags. And for what, nobody knows. For who, nobody knows. Because we saw even in the Kurdish regional government's area, you know, Yazidi Kurdish people were given away. And we saw that other nationalities and other beliefs were given away. For what? For the interest of this small area which they couldn't protect either. Like Erbil was almost given away as well. So here though, ever since the past in history, all these four states, although they never liked each other and they were like, you know, enemies of each other, but when it came to the Kurdish question, they would line up with each other. So how is it that Turkey has been convinced to turn a blind eye to Kurdish regional government, Kurdistan regional government? The reason behind this is not so very difficult. Turkey has been given the patronage for the south of Kurdistan, and it has been promised that there will be no other Kurdistan. So there will be no Rojava, there will be no north, there will be no east. And this is why we have this pumping of the Kurdistan, the flag, you know, and because all the thoughts are on statist thoughts, everyone is picking up this flag a lot more than any other flag because, you know, all the institutions in this world work on this. You take seriously the state, nothing else. You know, the UN works on this, the Council of Europe works on this, the EU works on this, all the states work on this. This is why all other nations are no nations, because the only nation is one with a state, and nobody cares about the rest. So, with the Arab Spring, what happened is that, can we say that all these Arabic people did not really have good intentions, or that they were not oppressed, or they didn't want freedom? No, on the contrary, they did. But what happened is that to be able to change the regimes and redesign the Middle East, they benefited from these feelings and the protests of these peoples on the streets. And unfortunately, these people did not have an alternative to put in practice, but only to protest. So what happened is through this, the unrest, the Arab Spring that happened, the superpowers were able to redesign according to themselves a lot more, and then leave those who protested as they were. And we saw that we had even worse regimes than ever before. Look at Libya. What's happening in Libya? They are actually, robbing Libya, its life, its nature, its resources, and everything. I mean, look at what's happening in Egypt. I mean, everywhere. Look at everywhere that they have touched in the name of there's an uprising and that there should be a better regime there. So, in Syria, the good thing was, I have to say, I mean, sometimes people say, yeah, you say too much about Ocalan. Well, I am from, Freedom for Ocalan initiative. But apart from that, Ocalan saw this coming even with Syria. He even saw the Shengal genocide coming as well. 4 months before the Shengal genocide, Mount Sinjar genocide, Ocalan told the PKK, go to that area because ISIS is going to attack there. I can see it coming. And what happened is that there was a huge quarrel with the KDP, Kurdistan Democratic Party, and they would not allow it. They would not have it that the guerrillas would go there. And the PKK, after all this happened, gave a self-critique. It said, we saw it coming, but we were not allowed to go in there. If we had gone in there, we would have had to clash with the Peshmergas. So they could not do this. And they said, maybe we should have. Maybe then so many people would not have died. We would not have reached there the last moment to stop the ethnic cleansing and the belief cleansing in that region. So with Syria, Öcalan proposed the third way. He said, okay, look, this is just like Libya and Egypt and everywhere else. There's nothing being offered here to the peoples. What's being offered is a change of power, change of hands of power. So why should we have any dealings with this? He said, do your own thing. Implement the paradigm. And as I said, people in Rojava have been organized since 1979. So this is not just an overnight thing and suddenly, they were so ready for this. It doesn't work like that. It would be to give magical attributes to what's happening. So that's how come they were all prepared and they're able to now try to actually implement this democratic confederalism. I don't have time for North Kurdistan, unfortunately, because it's not only Rojava. Maybe it was really good, it came to the public limelight because there was ISIS, and the West likes stories like that, and maybe not the West, the superpowers maybe like to create things like this to keep the tension. And as we all know, the whole world is actually, capitalism is going through a structural crisis. So I know I really don't have time and I don't want to throw in things here, but the things that are happening in the Middle East is a world structural crisis. And it's been trying to be solved over there or to prolong the lifespan of capitalism. And if we are not careful, and this is how we talked about Rojava, if we do not give the fight right, our whole world is going to have a much more shift to the right, and we can see that everywhere. ISIS is a good pretext for this. And of course, due to the policies that have been implemented on every one of us, we are so ready to divide into fronts. So lots of other things are happening. In North Kurdistan, in Turkey too, such a paradigm is being implemented. There are talks, but it looks like, be more tension before there can be peace. Thank you. want to hear more about all these paradigms, you will listen to David here today, but you will also listen to him in Hamburg as well.
Oh, right.
We have a 3-day conference there. So get the site address and check it out.
The Kurds being victims of, ever since 9/11, even more, of anti-terror laws, of the anti-terror law which is used so exploitedly and wrongly by Turkey and in Iran and in the KRG and of course in our own country, even against our own diaspora Kurds in this country. I mean, you've given us so much to talk about, and I really would welcome now questions and comments. Yes, Leo. Please, when you speak, will you say who you are?
Okay, Les.
Les.
Maybe I'll turn this way. You can hear me. Yes. Yes, I want to ask about the role of popular assemblies, which we know globally from the Occupy movement. And this is, I've read that this has been an important part of creating democratic autonomy, giving a practical meaning to that concept in Rojava, under the unusual circumstances that many of the wealthiest property owners have fled because of the difficulties in everyday life, especially in parts most affected by the war. So I want to ask, how does the absence of the wealthy class perhaps make democratic autonomy either more difficult or more easy, in the sense that then popular assemblies can decide on how to use the resources without the vested interests of those who might object?
We'll take 2 more questions.
That
okay,
was going
and
to be
then
my talk.
We'll just have to do it in 3. So the second question, yes. Can you say who you are, please?
Yeah, so my name's Mohammed. Yes, my question is, what kind of role what if any kind of role are the governments in the region having in a place like Rojava? So I'm thinking specifically the Iranians, Assad government. It sounds like Turkey isn't getting directly involved, but I don't know. The Turkish government, and then I'm thinking also in terms of Hezbollah, whether or not their focus is entirely working with Iranian Revolutionary Guard in terms of combating anti-Assad forces and ISIS, or whether or not there's any kind of link whatsoever between. I mean, are they all just really busy with the civil war, or to what extent is Rojava there because there's a space that's been created for them? I mean, like a space to be able to act.
One more. Howard.
Hi, yeah, my name's Howard. My question was about what efforts have you undertaken to engage previously with Brahimi or now with Stefan de Mistura, who are these individuals that have had these sort of UN special envoy roles in the Syrian crisis. De Mistura's been focusing on the issue of kind of the notion of a freezing conflict in Aleppo and elsewhere, but given everything that was said about what's been happening in the regions that you described as being potentially a model for elsewhere in Syria, I was curious whether there have been sort of efforts to reach out to de Mistura or previously Brahimi or not.
Okay. I will really not go much into the assemblies and all that because David's just recently been from there. What I wanted to do was give a bit of a background and leave more of the implementational things to David as well because he's been there. So, but just maybe to say 1 or 2 words, and I tried to say this in yesterday's seminar as well. What's being tried with these popular assemblies is that whether there are big businessmen or not, because in Rojava, rightfully, they have run away. But in the north, for example, they are there. They are there and they are collaborating with the state. So they are, there are those who are patriotic and who are with the movement, but who are rich and who are businessmen and women maybe. But they are also sympathetic to this paradigm. So what we need to do is, it's not just about, it creates a difficulty when these business people are collaborators with the state and not so sympathetic already. But we shouldn't be forgetting that what I said before, that each and every individual, more or less, if they are not aware of what the system is doing, if has the chance, will become a billionaire. It has the chance. And I love this one phrase by Ocalan. He says the victory of capitalism is not in all of this, but in its ability to conquer the mind. Whereas, let's say 100 years ago, if you were poor, you would rebel. But now, if you're poor, you dream of winning the lottery. This is the victory, because you don't anymore look to change what you're going through change of system, but you're looking at, becoming the top player. So this is why he's saying the system has won in that sense. So, but I will leave that whole thing to. And of course with Rojava, everybody has their hand in there. ISIS did not just come out of nowhere either. Let's be quite clear on that too. And ISIS has quite a clear name. It has declared its name, what it wants to do. So everybody who has supported it has done so accordingly. And it looks as if, it is fitting the criteria that we saw so many analysts talking, whether Iraq will be divided upon 3 criterions: Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. And so it looks to us that, as I was saying, and I hadn't finished, that Turkey turned a blind eye to the creation of the Kurdistan regional government in return for a promise that it's the Kurdistan, but also that it becomes the leader of Sunni Islam world. Suddenly we saw this Turkey growing and shining under the AKP regime, that all the doors were open to Hollywood, to fashion industry, from there to Africa, from there to Balkans, and all of the Middle East. Suddenly Erdogan became the champion of Palestinians and Palestinian rights, suddenly. And throughout this time, it still managed to keep its relationship with Israel. None of the agreements were annulled. They still have their military agreements and stuff. And a week ago, US sold I don't know what they're called, these unmanned drones, but war drones.
War drones.
Not just normal drones. They have been sold to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and one more country, I don't remember now. So, and the US is making statements saying, don't be fooled, this situation is not going to go away. So we are seeing that there is an intention to keep this warfare at a manageable level. So we are seeing that this is the plan. So yes, in Rojava there are many hands. Iran's hand is one. I can share this news with everybody. It's an open secret. We heard that the Syrian regime may consider the democratic autonomy for the Kurds, but Iran is against it. Iran is not allowing. Iran says no. And of course Turkey says no, because as I said, there are negotiations, I wouldn't call it negotiations yet, hoping that negotiations would begin, but it doesn't look so. The general elections are about to happen in Turkey in June. But Turkey has been an very strong supporter of ISIS. This was all over the news everywhere. We don't have to be saying this, They gave ammunition, weapons. They allowed people to cross through. They did not insistently allow the Kurdish regional government to do anything positive for Rojava. Before ISIS attacked Kobane, Kurdish regional government they digged holes between the borders of Rojava and South Kurdistan to stop any even humanitarian aid going through. So all this only occurred much later when ISIS attacked Erbil, and this was stopped by Kurdish guerrillas, and they saw that this is going to target the whole of Kurdish gains. And so only then, and only when the US approached it a little bit as well, after the humongous resistance of the Kurdish guerrillas in Kobane, that the Kurdish regional government sent anyone there. So there is a huge involvement of Turkey. It's no joke. With Hezbollah, no. I mean, I think the PKK doesn't look at it at all like that. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's never approached the issue like this. It's been quite principled in its approach to different forces, and it hasn't made, even tactically, the only tactical thing it has accepted is the bombardment by the US against some specific ISIS targets during the Kobane warfare. That is the only tactical thing it has accepted. So that is the situation. And with Howard's question, I know that there were talks being held as individuals, but as you know, they were not called to the Geneva meetings, one or two, but in a meeting in Russia, they were able to participate, but there's nothing concrete that is coming out of there because it's two different status quos, and Kurds don't fit neither of them, neither the Russian status quo nor the US status quo.